Hello, and welcome to Under the Mountain with Stephen Graham Jones. My name is Anthony, and I am a librarian and denizen here at Under the Mountain. Uh, if you have been paying attention, we have recently had Stephen Graham Jones visit the library. This is now dropping after the fact, so we wanted to have this as think of it as a supplement, a bonus feature. You might have noticed some of these clips on our social media over the past few weeks. So now you get to see the whole entire conversation. And I think it's going to be a good one. Well, it is a good one. Wishful thinking, you got to project a positive opinion. So we will be talking about writing and then also about Jones's most recent novel, My Heart is a Chainsaw. And for those who you should know by now, Stephen Graham Jones, the author of My Heart is Chainsaw, The Only Good Indians, Night of the Mannequins, Mongrels, so some of the more recent titles, and also an upcoming sequel to My Heart is a Chainsaw, and that one is Don't Fear the Reaper.
Yep.
Yeah. But we will be talking about My Heart is a Chainsaw in a little bit more depth in a few minutes. So I will warn again that there will be some spoilers with that. But just so you know now that if you haven't read it yet, you can pause it there and then read it, or hopefully you have read it by now. So the first question I would like to ask you is, what makes a good final girl?
It's her arc. I think that's what makes her good. If a final girl starts out already pretty bad, like already killer, then she's not gonna have an arc because she all she has to do is stay the same, But if a final girl starts out like Laurie Strode in Halloween, where she's the good babysitter, she is worried if she has her chemistry book for school and she pays attention in class. She is very studious and very vigilant and kind of hesitant about engaging the world. By the end of that movie, she's completely metamorphosed from that. This violent encounter with Michael Myers, this bad night in Haddonfield, has transformed her. Her arc is she's gone from studious and reserved to I presume she's still studious, but she is very she's screaming, she's coming after Michael. She's become something that she wasn't. So to me, that's what makes a good final girl, is that she starts out at a place where she's not a final girl.
And it seems like that level of relatability, I think, really plays into it. Whereas,
Yeah,
especially in time period, Jamie Lee Curtis being sort of like this all-American kind of girl, but without being showy about it. Whereas in My Heart is a Chainsaw, I feel like what really makes Jade relatable is her sense of self-worth, or rather damaged sense of self-worth, is very relatable.
yeah. I wanted to come at with My Heart is a Chainsaw. I love the slasher, but I think one problem with a slasher, as it's kind of developed since, I don't know, since the 70s, has been that the final girl has become this unattainable ideal for people. I think the function of the final girl is supposed to be that we can put ourselves in her shoes and imagine that were we in this kind of situation, we would react the same way she is, which is to say, in our own lives, when we face different obstacles and challenges and bullies, that we can find the final girl in us to push back, to survive, to persist. But the final girl has become this like valedictorian cheerleader athlete warrior who is just so perfect that I think the common person out there, which is all of us, has a hard time imagining ourselves in her size nines or whatever she wears, and with My Heart as a Chainsaw, I wanted to kind of push the idea, or open the door on the possibility anyway, that a final girl is not about what's on the outside; it's who you are on the inside, and so yeah, I did want to make her more relatable to us.
It is interesting you bring up the idea that them representing an ideal in that discussion, because it kind of reminds me in some ways of how the idea of a femme fatale has developed, to where it is an archetype as opposed to a character that imbues certain behavior and traits. So that I find that is interesting, trying to take that away from being that, while also discussing the very nature of that within the text, which I want
Yeah.
to touch more on that a little bit later. But you know, speaking of femme fatales, in a way, the final girl does function as one for my next question, which is what makes a good slasher.
Mhm. I think a slasher also needs its own arc, and it's usually a revenge arc. Like I would say, in 80 or 85% of slashers, it's some sort of revenge situation. Like Jason Voorhees is mad at all campers and camp counselors and people who visit the lake because they cut his mom's head off, according to him. They're all potentially guilty or culpable for that. And or all the ghost faces, they have what they think are good reasons for doing what they're doing, you know. And most slashers will have what they see as good reasons for doing what they're doing. And what's important, I think, for a good slasher is that we, the audience, identify with that a little bit, that we understand that like in prom night, that these sixth graders or however old they were who are playing a game and end up killing one of their friend group and then getting away with it. We watching that think, well, that's not right, something should have happened. And us thinking something us thinking they should pay for that in some fashion is what makes for a good slasher. And so if you can give a slasher a good what we think is a good reason, then I think the audience is going to be satisfied. The other probably 15% of slashers are what I call mad dog slashers. They're just they just exist to get a weapon and kill people. Like the dude in Slumber Party Massacre. He doesn't have a reason. It's just kind of completely arbitrary why he settles on this one group of people to go after that night. And I mean those kind of slashers are satisfying as well, but they I'm not sure what makes a good mad dog slasher. I know what makes a good revenge slasher. What makes a good mad dog slasher is probably um, their persistence, I guess, their insistence that this is the group they want and no other group. Because at a certain point, when you're, I don't know, trying to bust into a house and lock everybody's head off, if it gets to be too much trouble, you can go down the street and do the same thing. But this Mad Dog Slasher, for some reason, is fixated on this one house, this one apartment, this one whatever it is. And that might be what, or part of what makes them interesting, anyways, or compelling.
Well, I guess they then enter sort of the realm of a force of nature in a way.
A little bit, yeah.
I think of the way Javier Bardem's character is portrayed in A Country for Old Men, Anton Chigurh, where it's like he is, they function sort of on a metaphorical level, but most of the time slashers aren't too particularly concerned with that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, really, I think in the golden age of slashers, which was the late 70s, early 80s, America had moved to the suburbs, and we were terrified of the Cold War, graduating into the nuclear winter, and so, which is to say, we were really scared of missiles coming across the ocean. So everybody moved to suburbia, away from the centers of population, thinking it's going to be safe out here. But then here's Michael Myers. He's there in the suburbs waiting for you. And yes, he carries a chef's knife, out of the kitchen, but he may as well be carrying a Tomahawk missile. I think he was activating those same fears for us. Anyways.
Well, he is the boogeyman. So
yeah, yeah.
Brings me to my next question, which is in capturing the voice of a character, which you'd have to do with a final girl and a slasher to some degree. Do you find that there is a responsibility as an author for these voices, especially since in your work, where you often deal with characters who are disenfranchised in some way?
Yeah, or marginalized in some fashion. Yeah, I think it's always the responsibility of the writer to get that voice right and as authentic as I can, anyways. And the trick is, like, I don't know what it's like to be a 17-year-old girl, actually. I'm talking about writing Jade for My Heart is a Chainsaw. However, my daughter at the time I was writing it was 17, and my wife and a lot of my friends had been 17-year-old girls. And I was able to give the manuscripts of My Heart is a Chainsaw to a lot of them. And not, I think it's unfair to ask people, is this authentic? Is this real? Is this like good representation? I don't think you can ask people that, because that puts a lot of pressure on them to speak for a whole, gender, people, whatever, to say, yes, you get to pass, this meets the threshold or whatever. I don't think that's the right way to ask it. But you can ask, what am I doing wrong? And they can tell me, well, like the stuff with Jade's hair, she's constantly dyeing it different colors, and I just thought that was fun. But I had to explain to me that yeah, it might be fun, but your hair falls out at a certain point. And so I had to work that into the story to make it real.
Well, she definitely, Jade functions with something of a death wish, so most times, so it works that her hair is part of that. So yeah, I think also going along with that is the idea of placing the character. And one of the things I think is strong in your work is a sense of setting. Whereas, it's not that it's purple prose telling setting, it's more of you're there, it feels like you're getting an insider's voice in a setting. So I just was curious if you could speak to that in your writing. How does setting affect you?
I used to, I remember back, this is probably 15, 20 years ago, it seems like there was a divide between, or people would like self-identify, I'm a place writer or I'm not a place writer. And I always thought, well, of course I'm not a place writer. I write about, action or people, I don't know what I write about, but I didn't feel like it was place anyways. But then, when was this? 2013, I guess. I was writing this big crime novel, and I wanted to set it against a backdrop of like a Kafka City X, just a gray industrial, steam at night, just a generic backdrop. Look, this the kind of backdrop you see in, what's that movie? Is it Joe versus a volcano? Tom Hanks, that old movie. I think that has that kind of backdrop too. And but the problem was, I got about 120 pages into that novel, and it started to feel like pushing a boulder uphill. And that's never how writing novels is for me. Writing novels is always about riding that boulder downhill. I'm just trying to keep up. And I thought, what is going on here? This is not how it usually works for me. And I got invited right about that time to West Texas, my home, to participate in a book festival. So I went for the weekend, and they were, driving me around from this venue to that venue. And I was looking at the back window of these rides I was in, and I started seeing the town I kind of grew up in. And I realized this is the place where that crime story happens. And so I went home, restarted the novel, put it in Midland, Texas, and the novel just told itself so easily, because I understood at that point, or I finally understood, like 13, 14 years of my writing career, that place is a character as well. And it's maybe one of the most important characters there is, and I'd always known that if I write a novel set in, 27, 22 on Mars, way in the future, different planet, that still you can peel up that red dirt and it's going to be West Texas. I always felt like you can really only know the emotional contours of a single place. And that usually is a place where you came up, and I came up in West Texas. And so I think everywhere I write is going to be West Texas. I can dress it up as Montana. I can dress it up as New York City. I can dress it up as Mars, but I think it's always going to have the pulse of West Texas.
Does that, do you find it challenging to write about those settings in times outside of when you yourself were growing up there?
No, I never. I mean, I I guess that probably kind of is my default, 8 tracks and late 70s Ford trucks. That's what's always easiest for me to write. But when I step into other, places, other eras, um, I can be in the Old West and talking about a buckboard, a buggy, a horse-drawn buggy, and I'm gonna do the research to understand what the ride is like, and what the sound is like and everything. But in my heart, it's still going to be a '79 F-150. I think.
Well, that does also lead into the next question, which is has aging affected how you approach writing the genre or just writing in general?
Used to, and maybe it's still like this. I haven't thought about this. All my characters were always at least 4 years younger than me, and usually a lot younger. And I think the reason for that was that, like right now, I'm 49, about to be 50, and I think it's probably going to be 4 or 5 years until I can look back at being this age and understand it for what it is. Like I think you need distance from stuff to properly mythologize it or have the objective distance to make it malleable in a story. So most of my stories have been about people who are a little bit younger than me. However, within that, I think, shoot, probably at least 2/3 of my stories, if not three-quarters, um, are probably people between the age of about 16 and 20, I suspect. I feel really comfortable working in that age. And it's not that I mean, it's easy to say that was a particularly like I don't know, pungent era for me for when I was that age, but it is for all of us. I don't think that's anything unique to say. Um, I think what I'm drawn to with people who are that age is, and I heard this in a song the other day actually. What was, oh, it was. I've never heard Limp Bizkit, which I'm like 25 years after the fact, and I heard it somewhere, and the lead singer, is it Fred Durst? I guess he was like chanting, "We ain't never gonna change, we ain't never gonna change," and I love that when you're like 16 to 20, you think this is the final form I'm going to be in. I'm always going to have these ideals. I'm always going to believe in this, this, and this, and it's a hard line. I'm never going to compromise on it. And when you're 28, when you're 34, you look back on those ages, those days, and you're like, I was so idealistic. I was so stupid, and you change throughout life. Every day you change. But especially when you're 16 to 20, you don't have any suspicion that you're ever going to change. And that to me is just a beautiful moment, that certainty. I think after that, we never have that certainty again. We always know that more change is coming. That's not bad. It's good to do. It's good to be aware of that. But I also love the stubbornness of this is me and I'm always going to be like this.
Well, another question I had was, since this book in particular deals so much with uh, slashers and slashers as a film medium, while also being one, did you find that to be a challenge in terms of translating what is usually a film medium into prose?
I did, yes. It's definitely a challenge. You're right. The slasher grew up at the box office, and so all of its techniques are baked into cinema, or cinema is baked into all its techniques. Anyway, it's like in the only good Indians. I wanted to do slasher cam, which is point of view camera, the voyeuristic camera where you're looking through Michael Myers' mask or looking through the parted bushes or whatever it is. And to do that, I had to come up with some like rule breaking workarounds where you drop into second person continuously without a section break. And and um and still struggling with that, I think, is why My Heart is a Chainsaw is finally present tense, because movies always feel present tense to me, anyways. They do, even the ones that are voiced over from a place after the events of the movie, like American Beauty, say that still feels present tense to me. um and actually, the sequel, Don't Fear the Reaper, is present tense as well. Who knows, maybe the third one will be present tense. I have no idea what it's going to be yet, but um yep. I do think that's why it adopted that form, present tense.
Was it a matter of, in terms of doing sequels, was it fitting that they're sequels because it's a slasher, or is it the character of Jade you felt so connected with that you wanted to keep going with her?
I do feel connected to Jade, but it's not just Jade either. It's other characters who are involved, and also just the what we were talking about earlier, the character of place. I think there's still stories to be told in Indian Lake, in Proof Rock, in Terra Nova, and Camp Blood, in Fremont County, Glen Dam, and just all up and down there. And I mean, tell you the truth, I could go on and on, but at a certain point, like when you keep torturing the same surviving characters with slasher after slasher, you're like, why don't they ever get a break? You know, so I think going past three, I think is pushing it. So I'm capping it off at three. That's my plan, anyways.
I look forward to reading the next one when it comes out.
Thank you.
I wanted to change gears right here and go into the aforementioned spoiler territory. So if you're watching this right now, you've been warned that we're about to jump right into it. No prisoners. So I now feel like everybody's had their chance to stop if they want to. So I'm just going to go right into one of the things that I think what really fascinated me about My Heart is a Chainsaw is the fact that calling it a slasher is ultimately just only one element of it. One of the things that's fascinating about the book is that you have Jade who is obsessed with slashers, and she does all this work going through all the different permutations of what could be happening in this town, and even going outside the slashers to like supernatural elements, say. And then what we discover as the reader is that she's kind of right all across the board. Like she guesses to some degree at some point almost everything that is happening, not quite the way she expected it, but you know, we do have a slasher, we do have a undead girl from the lake, there's also the spirits at the bottom of the lake, there's also a bear gone feral and eating people, and so that it's all just happening. And one of the things I thought was interesting about that is that, you know, you could obviously consider that a postmodern touch. And I was curious about those elements in terms of earlier works you have written, such as The Last Final Girl and Demon Theory, where you do also work through what is some kind of a deconstruction of the genre, whereas those were academic almost in nature. This one, I think you did something interesting in that you kind of hid that quality in some degree, or you made it feel organic. And I guess I just wanted to speak about that in general, because I find that fascinating element of it.
Yeah, you know, I look at it. I did a novel I wrote it in 1999, I guess. And that was, I think Scream 1 and Scream 2 were out. I want to say Scream 3 came out in 2000. I might be wrong about that. But anyways, I mean, in a larger sense, the answer to your question is just Scream. You know, that in 1996, I saw Scream like 7 times in a row in the theater, and it changed my life. I realized that all the homework I've been doing for the past 20 years was worth it. This was a test. And to me, it changed the genre enough that the only way to tell a slasher was to talk about the slasher while you were telling it, you know. To me, that makes it scarier. Like for a long time, zombie movies were caught in the trap of they always happened in some side dimension from ours that had never experienced Night of the Living Dead or any of the zombie movies or zombie literature. And which is to say, when the characters would see a dead person shuffling up the street, they would say, "What is that?" instead of "That's a zombie," you know. And it always feels kind of fake, and it feels kind of safe too, in that it's happening over there, not here in our world. When zombie movies started to allow stories to happen in our world where there was a tradition of zombies, they became much scarier, I think. And it's the same with slashers. All these golden age slashers, and they didn't all do this, most of them did this though, where they didn't exist within a tradition where there were drive-in movies about teens getting killed at camp and all that, sleepaway camp, all that stuff. And so they didn't know the rules that were feeding him into this meat grinder over the weekend, over prom, whatever it is. And that's kind of safe. I feel like it's kind of safe. So for me, to let a slasher be scary, it has to happen in our world. And to happen in our world, there's usually going to be at least one or two people who know the rules of the game, who are the Randy and Scream, you know. But yes, you're right. My Heart is a Chainsaw delivers its slasher, I don't know, exposition or theorizing or whatever you want to call it, deconstruction. It delivers it differently than Demon Theory does. Demon Theory does it with footnotes largely, and then The Last Final Girl does it in a I don't know if I can really put my finger on how The Last Final Girl does it, but it does it in a different way. Izzy and Jade Izzy from The Last Final Girl and Jade from Hunter the Chainsaw are very similar characters, but the tone of the novels is very different. I feel like just because the delivery method is different, and um, then in the Only Good Indians, I thought, well, maybe you can tell a story without the characters knowing the conventions of the slasher, and so I did that. You know, Gabe and Lewis and Cass and Ricky, they don't know jack about Jason, Michael, Freddy, you know, Ghostface, any of that, and it still processes through on the same beats as it does in My Heart is a Chainsaw, as it does in Last Final Girl, as it does in the first movement of Demon Theory. Um, but yes, in My Heart is a Chainsaw, the exposition is moved a little bit. It's moved into Jade, but it's more like she has pulled it into herself and made it part of who she is, because she is so far on the outside of any social circle she could plug into, her family, her school, her community, that she's out in the cold and she has to insulate herself with something. And I think, and she just happened to find that Bay of Blood VHS in a bargain bin, and that's what she clung onto when she needed it. And she insulated herself with slashers, and they become a lens for her to make sense of just about every interaction she has with the world. Whereas Demon Theory did it with what, 485 footnotes, which each had about 12 branches itself, you know, and it was, yeah, it is totally different. I'll probably do it a different way some other time as well. You know, I think there's all kinds of different ways to do it. We have not nearly plumbed the possibilities.
Well, speaking of possibilities, you know, you actually gave me a way to ask about this because I wasn't really sure how to fit it in. But
Mm.
is it because in The Only Good Indian, is it because the characters are so unfamiliar with the genre, they're not, that's not part of their
Mm.
psyches,
Mm.
that you were able to come up with a moment like, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but the climatic basketball game.
Oh yeah, with
Because
Denora, yeah,
that to me just
yeah.
came out so out of left field. Like it's a great moment because it's, you know, it's so unexpected in this kind of novel, especially at this point in the
Yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah. Um, you know, back in 2003, I did a novel, The Bird Is Gone, and I wanted it to all hinge on a basketball game, and that fell apart quickly because I couldn't get the basketball game done right. I couldn't make it matter, and so I did the story in other ways. Then in 2007, I did a novel, Lead Feather. I thought I'm finally good enough. I can tell a story where it all hinges on one character rising up to make a shot at the end, and I you know, choreographed everything where it ends with this character Thomas White Elk jumping up, you know, making a little short jump shot, winning the game, but it was boring. It didn't matter, and I had to find another ending for that novel. Luckily, it was right there waiting. But then finally, in the Only Good Indians, I was able to stage everything into a climactic battle scene on the basketball court. And I think the reason I was able to do it in 2017, where I wasn't able to in 07 and 03, was that in 07 and 03, I was still playing ball all the time. But starting about in 07, 08, I blew out my knee, my ankle. I had all kinds of surgeries, and I kept being on like a cane and crutches and wheelchairs for all these months. And I realized that basketball, I may love it, but it's slowing down my writing production. You know, being on all these drugs and surgery tables is not helping me to write novels. So I had to choose. And so I gave up basketball. I don't even shoot free throws anymore. And it was my passion for, you know, 35 years, 40 years. Um, but which is to say, I had quit ball by the time I wrote the Living Indians. And I was talking about that distance I usually need for my characters. They're usually younger than me, such that I can have the distance necessary to see what's going on a little bit. I think it's the same way with basketball. When I was not playing, then I was able to play better on the page because I could properly mythologize it. Um, but as for the specific mechanics or like reasons for why this all happens on a basketball court instead of, you know, I don't know, on the highway or something, it's that okay, woman, for her to get satisfaction from what she feels like is justice, what we would call revenge, is she wants to take away from each of these people what's the most important to them. And so Denora defines herself as a ball player, as the best ball player. And so Elkin Woman, in order to take that away from Denora, has to confront her on the court, has to meet her on the court.
Um, one of the elements that also caught my eye in uh, My Heart is a Chainsaw is uh, during I believe it's the last interlude. She's talking about Jaws,
Mm,
and she brings up the Indianapolis and the sinking of that, which is mentioned in the movie. But what was interesting was you brought up the theory that I had actually encountered before regarding that the idea that the Indianapolis was carrying the parts for the Fat Man or was a little
mm.
boy.
Yeah,
Um,
one of them,
I
maybe
can't
both of
remember.
them. I don't know. Yeah, yeah.
But the idea of this is a almost sort of act of revenge
Mm,
by nature, and I first encountered it in Will Self, the author, has this book
yeah.
called Shark that
Huh.
yeah, like it actually a big chunk of it is narrating the event itself of
Oh,
the
wow.
sharks. Yeah, it's a really good book.
Huh.
It's part of his sort of mission statement of retooling the modernism, bringing it back because he doesn't believe modernism is over. So it's written in a very experimental style, but
Yeah.
it's a good book. I'd recommend it.
All right. Thank you.
What I think is interesting about that and why I mention it here is that you know that is essentially a metaphor laid out right there, and I think that's one of the most um, interesting things about horror as a genre. And any good storytelling is
Mhm.
that metaphor is there in some degree. And so I guess, is that something that you find being someone who is as productive as you are and prolific, uh, does that still resonate with you as the idea of the genre as its metaphorical heft?
You know, I'm always thrilled and impressed that people are able to like see these metaphors in it. And when I read, I can also see and extract metaphors. When I'm writing it, I can't think like that. When I'm writing it, I have to think of people versus people, or people versus monsters, people versus nature. It's always on the ground level. I can't think in abstract terms like metaphor. So I'm glad that that's all there, or I'm glad that people see it. But when I'm writing, I can't ever seem to think like that. I think if I did, I would feel like I was just pushing chess pieces around a board. And if fiction ever becomes that, then I think it would be boring for me. I need to feel like these are real people doing real things for their own reasons, and that's how I fool myself into believing in the reality of this place long enough to get it down on the page that it can engage the reader.
Uh, One last question in terms of noticing things, trends
Mm,
in your works, is the role of I would say I feel like I can make this point more about fathers than mothers, but
mm,
roles of fathers in your stories are
mm.
often you know disappointing or even predatory. I think of My Heart's Chainsaw and also
Yeah, yeah,
your novella Interior
yeah. Mapping the
Happy
interior.
Interior. Thank
Yeah,
you. Is that I guess like, I'm just curious, is that something that again just sort of comes out, or is that a
yeah.
conscious sort of engagement with I guess roles within the Native American community and sort of
Uh,
archetypes?
I think it just comes out. To tell you the truth, I feel like writers, we all generally have like one, maybe at most two stories inside of us, two like types of stories. Like I feel like I have like one and a half types of story maybe, but the type of story that I always default to, that I find myself telling when I don't mean to tell, is a father son story, or a father child story, anyways. And I mean, I think what writers do is we just like we take these premises, these story ideas, these situations, these characters into our mom's wardrobe closet and dress them up in different clothes and trot them out and say, look, it's a different story, but it's not a different story. It's the same father son story. I feel like that's what I'm doing. I'm just telling the same story over and over. And I always get like, solicitations for themed anthologies. Sometimes I take them and I think, well, this is going to be fun. This is a story I haven't told. It's about cats in space, and the satellite moon is a ball of yarn, all this stuff. But sure enough, man, 5 pages in, I'm telling another father son story. I don't even mean to. It just bubbles up all on its own.
Well, I think in particular, within My Heart's a Chainsaw, I think that element really packs a punch in it because you are given enough clues to see it coming. It's even told early on enough, but it still is a heartbreaking moment when you are finally have Jade, who's such a proud character, admit it to the reader and to herself in some way, and I think that's um, handled really well in it. Uh, so I guess like with the father son stories, you also I'll ask more about female characters too, just because I feel like there are reoccurring elements. They tend to be not I wouldn't say like have all their stuff together, but more grounded and of the characters. Like they seem to like they're fine in some way, whereas the male characters seem like they're falling apart usually more.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
no, that's I think that's just what I observed growing up and all through my life, that and I don't think it's necessarily that men and women are like built that necessarily differently. I think that the society throws them into different roles and they take to those roles, like I think in our society, men are allowed to do more stupid things than women are. Women tend to get saddled with responsibility and duty and more than men do, I think. And for that reason, the women in my fiction tend to be more stable. They can be dreamers, but they're also fighters. They tend to be like just they tend to be better people to tell the truth, I guess. And this probably comes back to my father son stories. you know.
well, I was a teenager who read Hemingway religiously and was
Mm,
very much into the masculine side of things. But then you realize, kind of gets boring after a while. And tends
yeah,
to be, I find myself more drawn to female protagonists or female creative people in general, just because
yeah.
you know what men are about to some degree as a guy. Uh, well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I hope if this is your first time watching this is your first time interaction with Stephen Graham Jones, I hope you will go out and grab any of his numbers books. He has one coming out in July. Is that correct? And
Um, no, I think it's Don't Fear the Reaper is August 2nd, I think.
One for the Reaper is August 2nd.
Yeah.
And when this will be dropping around start of March, it's the end of the month. My Heart of Chainsaw will be in paperback, correct?
Yeah, yeah. And
I got
also I have a um another thing coming out in spring. I don't know if I can announce it yet. So just another thing. I think it'll be in March also.
keep an eye out, everybody. By the time this comes out, it'll probably be announced, so you'll know then. All right. Well, thank you, Stephen, for joining me today.
Thanks, man. It was great talking.
Yeah.